Now I can add some partitioning to the tray, and I'm going to leave this piece slightly proud of the top of the tray because I want to create some sort of handle to pull the tray out. Okay, that's a nice fit now, and I'll just mark up where the top of the box is.
I used a large washer to mark up the shape for the handle. And cut it out on the bandsaw. Then I cleaned up the edges with the disc sander and a round file.
So now this should slide in place and act as a handle to remove the tray.
I marked up another cross section and cut this out in the same way as I had for the other partitions.
I was planning on gluing these pieces together, but now I've dry fitted them, they're really solid, so I'm not going to bother.
Then I glued it in place.
I'm just trying to straighten this by eye because, like Jimmy DeResta says, if it looks straight, it is straight. So I'm still not quite done with this build because I'm thinking of putting some sort of inlay into the lid, and I want to use some of this sapele to complement the splines on the box. I've set up a stop block on my bandsaw fence, and I'm going to use this mitre gauge to cut some small pieces of this sapele. I've also got this offcut of oak, which is more or less the same thickness as these pieces of sapele, so I'm going to cut some of this too.
I applied glue to a couple of long sapele strips and then created an alternating pattern between the small bits of sapele and oak. I used some spring clamps to hold everything in place and left it to dry. After a few hours, I could then clean up the faces on the bandsaw and then the belt sander. And at this point it was looking pretty good.
I was planning to put this inlay at the front of the lid like this, but now I think it'll look better right along the middle.
I made some reference marks for where I wanted to place the inlay.
So now I can measure both the width of the inlay, which is around 16 millimeters, and the thickness of the inlay, which is around 5.5. I'm going to set the blade height to around 5 millimeters, and then I can line up the blade with these marks. And the inlay doesn't quite fit, but it's very close. And I'm going to try one more pass, taking off a very slight amount. And I think that will go in. I might need to use a mallet. My table saw blade doesn't have flat teeth, so I've kind of got these grooves, so I'm going to take those out with a chisel.
I did one more dry fit to check it was okay, and then I could apply glue and push it in place. I used the hand plane to get the inlay flush with the lid.
We're very close now, so I'm going to switch to sanding. I'm going to use some of these brass butterfly hinges to mount the lid to the box. I need to position the lid so that it's perfectly flush with the box. And I'll position them in 3 centimeters from the side. And I'm going to tape down the lid so that it doesn't move around. I'm still not quite done with the box. I want to add a roundover to the top of the lid. So I've installed a roundover bit in my router. I was about to round over the back when I realised that the bearing of the roundover bit was going to run over these hinges and screws. So I'm going to need to remove these screws. And that looks like it's going to give me enough clearance to finish off the roundover.
I did some final hand sanding to clean up the router cuts.
I also bought these brass side hooks and eyes, and I'm going to use one of these as a latch for the front.
Then it was time to stamp my maker's mark onto the bottom.
It's finally time to finish the box, and I'm going to use some of this teak oil, mainly because it's all I've got at the moment.
What is your first musical memory?
Walking through the key.
Have you still got it? And do you still like it?
Have not still got it and do still like it. I saw them do.
So that's the jewellery box finished, and this was quite a lengthy project. I worked on this on and off for about 2 or 3 weeks, and I think I spent between 28 and 30 hours on it in total. And as I said at the start of the video, this box was made predominantly from a pallet wood which I believe to be called Meranti. And it's only the second time I've ever used this wood. I did previously make a mallet out of the same wood, but to be honest I don't think it's heavy enough or dense enough for that application, hence why I haven't really used this mallet very frequently. I tend to use this one instead. I just prefer using it mainly because it's smaller. Meranti isn't the easiest wood to work with. For example, in some areas when I was sanding, the grain kind of went fluffy. I'm not really sure if that's the best word to use, but hopefully you understand what I mean. And I mentioned earlier in the project that the grain has a tendency to tear out, and when it does so in long strands. And the best way I found to get a good finish on the wood was to use a very sharp hand plane, and I probably resharpened the cutting iron in the hand plane 2 or 3 times just throughout the course of the build of this project. I'm not sure whether it's classed as a hardwood or a softwood. It's pretty lightweight and I can dent it with my fingernail, and for that reason I'm probably going to add another layer of finish to the box, something like a spray varnish, just to give a bit more of a firmer seal and layer of protection. And I'll wet sand that spray varnish in between coats with something like a 400 grit wet and dry paper, just to keep the finish nice and smooth. So this box is for my girlfriend. Hopefully she will like it, and hopefully it will be around with her forever. Thanks again for watching, and special thanks to all my patrons for supporting my channel over on Patreon.